Sometimes you meet truly remarkable people who are making a tremendous difference in their communities and their countries. This is the case with Jean Nepo Sibomana and his Australian-born wife Sabrina, who founded the Mustard Seed Institute, an organization driving employment, training, and human development in rural Rwanda. Nepo is a survivor of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, which shocked the world in its consistency of application and brutality of purpose. He was just 11 years old when it happened. His story is one of unfathomable loss, but also, as his country continues to rebuild after near destruction, one of immense hope and inspirational personal strength. I was honored that he and Sabrina chose to share his story, their passion for Rwanda, and their hope for the future of Africa, and to be able to bring it to you now on the Smarter Cities podcast.
You're listening to Smarter Cities, discussions on urban life and how it's changing around us, with Jason D'Souza.
Nepo and Sabrina Sibomana, welcome to the Smarter Cities podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Now, it's extraordinarily early for you in Rwanda. I believe you mentioned it was 8:30 in the morning, so a busy family with young children. I'm deeply appreciative of you coming on. I hope it's a nice day there for you.
Yes, beautiful sunny day. It's always sunny here usually. It rains a lot, but usually sunny and warm all the time, so we're lucky.
Well, you've sent the rain our way. It is a miserable and cold day here in Sydney today. So
sorry about that.
I'm jealous. So look, really interesting time to be talking to you about what's happening in Africa. It's the first time I've actually interviewed two people at once on this podcast. So
okay.
We'll see how we go with that. I'm sure it's going to be great. But you guys have such a fascinating story, and you're doing such important work in Rwanda. I thought I would take the opportunity to have a chat to you. So, Sabrina, we might start with you. So you're a Tasmanian, if I'm not mistaken, born and bred, and somehow you've ended up in Rwanda. So I was very, very curious about your story. How did you end up doing what you're doing? Did you have a travel bug? What led you to end up in Rwanda?
Oh, it's a good question. Well, ever since, I guess, my early teen years, I was fascinated by Africa, African politics, social justice issues, human rights issues. So growing up in Tasmania, I always used to read the World News section of the Examiner newspaper, I remember, and it was all about in the 90s, what was happening in Rwanda and neighbouring DR Congo. So I always followed that with great interest and was always just fascinated by the stories coming out of there and the photos. And then later I think we got SBS News in Tasmania, so we had more world news. And, of course, during the 90s, there was a lot of coverage of what was happening in Rwanda and the DR Congo. So I was always following that and very fascinated from an early age about that and trying to understand why it was happening. Of course, it were terrible, terrible atrocities and seeing the mass movements of refugees and the suffering. I just wanted to understand why it was happening and to understand the history and the politics behind it. And the first opportunity I got to get to Africa was actually to go to South Africa, and that was when I was 15 years old, and I did a student exchange. I went to high school in Cape Town, did grade 10 in high school in Cape Town. Because we had links with South Africa then, it was 4 years after democracy, so it was 1998. So it was democracy was new there. There was a lot of hope and enthusiasm in South Africa at that time, so it was a lovely time to visit. So I'd also be very interested in South African politics because there was a lot of information about that. So I went over there, and that was my first time in Africa. And since then, I've always been trying to get back, always felt that I wanted to live in Africa. Yes, it was where I've always wanted to be.
Wow. And so as a 15-year-old, you went across to South Africa?
Yes. I saw a student exchange in a magazine, and I talked to my parents into letting me apply to go and do high school there. So I went to Cape Town. So it was a very fascinating. The highlight was I got to join, I think it's a Women's Day rally march to the Parliament House at that time, and Mandela came out and spoke to all the women.
Wow.
So that was a highlight because I'd read, of course, his book and been following all about the ANC movement there and the struggle against apartheid. So it was great as a 15-year-old to actually see what I'd been reading about coming from Tasmania, and before that I'd never even met anyone from Africa. So suddenly I was able to be there, which was wonderful at a young age.
And 4 years into the sort of birth of the Rainbow Nation, that must have been a really, illuminating experience. I mean, Australia in 1998 was a year after I arrived in Australia from Hong Kong. Was a very quite different place in a way, quite a world away from anything that was going on in world affairs. It was a very comfortable place to live. Things were, we were still recovering from a recession, is what I sort of remember when I was here.
Yes,
but that must have been quite a shock to the system.
Yes. So it was
such a change.
Yes, I mean, I loved it. It was wonderful because coming from Tasmania, which was very quiet and, as you say, kind of cut off from the world, isolated, we only got sort of world news, I think, when I was in my mid-teens, so on the TV with SBS, and we only had, I think, one page of world news in the newspaper. So going to be in a country that was so vibrant and full of life and full of hope for the future, and people were very enthusiastic and excited about what was going to happen with the country now that they'd finally achieved democracy. But it was a bit of a shock to my system from what I've been reading, because I lived in what was called, because of the Group Areas Act that they had passed during apartheid, the coloured community. So they were in between the black African communities and the white community. And so their view of the ANC, the new ruling party, was not necessarily positive at the time. So I was kind of confused. I was like, but you've now got majority rule. But it wasn't that everyone was happy about that. So it was a kind of a political education for me, living in this community that was between the two major groups that had sort of been having the competition for power of the state, and then this coloured community was sort of stuck in the middle, and I lived in that community. So that was really eye-opening for me to see how the different communities, the perspective of political change from the different communities in the country. Fascinating.
And how then did you go from a 15-year-old experiencing South Africa to the co-founder of the Mustard Seed Institute in Rwanda? Like that, there's a few steps involved there.
Yes, it was quite a long, many years journey. As you know, in Australia, it's hard to kind of find a way to Africa, really, besides South Africa, because we just don't have the links in Australia. There's not the connections, there's not the opportunities, really. Even in the universities, it's very hard to study Africa, which I was always frustrated by, because Africa was always my focus and my interest. So I guess the first step, I did my degree in London, where I could study at the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London. So that was kind of a first step. So I did a law degree with elements of African legal systems, African legal issues, which were quite unique because of the history. And then I sort of tried to get back to Africa a few times. I even worked in South Africa again at an Australian university that was trying to set up a campus there, and for a South African university for a while. And then finally I got to Rwanda for the first time on a University of Sydney study tour. And that was, I think, the first one to go to Rwanda. That was in 2007, I think, 2007, 2008, or beginning of 2008. So that was my first step into Rwanda, which I'd wanted to visit Rwanda for so long, but it wasn't somewhere where I sort of wanted to just turn up. I had to have something, some sort of structure to go with. So that was the study tour. We did a tour around Rwanda and met many organisations, including at that time I met Nepo, my future husband, at the Kigali Institute of Science and Technology, where he was a student, and he spoke to us as a leader of the Genocide Survivors Group at the university. So that's how we first met, and we kept in contact over the years because of our shared interest in social justice and human rights issues and what was developing in Rwanda. and his work on human rights and my further academic research. So I did academic research on the region, Great Lakes region, which was Rwanda, Eastern DR Congo, for quite a few years in Sydney and in Cambridge. And then finally I was able to go back for a big trip in 2014, and I did a tour of Burundi, Eastern DR Congo and Rwanda. And that was when I really felt, no, I really want to be here. I really want to be part of this, part of the world. This is where I belong, this is where I want to be. But of course it was a mission to find where I would fit, how I could make a life here. So I went with actually a friend who was a Congolese man, but who had immigrated to Australia as a refugee. And he was willing to go with me back for a road trip around the Great Lakes region. So we had a very interesting time travelling around, researching, interviewing different people from UN to former rebel leaders to refugees in camps. And then I met Nepo as he was crossing the road in the middle of Kigali, and I recognised him and yelled out, "Hey, Nepo."
Oh, wow.
And that's how we reconnected. It was just quite amazing. Yes, so then he invited me to a peace conference he was organising, which, of course, was both our interests. I think it was on Central African Republic and South Sudan. So we went along to that, and from there he came with me on a trip to Goma, which I think, if you know anything about Goma, is probably the least the least romantic place in the world. It's a very, very tragic place. We visited the internally displaced people's camps there and saw horrific conditions, and we visited the UN mission there and spoke to some MONUSCO and spoke to some former rebel leaders and community workers, and it just horrific what's going on there, and is still going
Nepo,
on.
I can think of easier ways to take a girl on a date.
So that was our first trip together. You can imagine but it was like both our passions. So I realised we still both had the same passion.
Wow!
So from there, the following year, 2015, I decided to move back permanently to Rwanda. Nepo and I decided we wanted to be together and wanted to do something together. So we sort of developed the idea of the Mustard Seed Institute from there. Which we had a passion to do something in the region. We wanted to make a difference. We wanted to make our small contribution, and we wanted to do it together. So I thought, okay, let's base ourselves in Rwanda, and we went from there to build something together. Yes, and that's how it was formed, basically, our desire to make a contribution in whatever way we could.
Well, that's a good segue into the Mustard Seed Institute. So, tell us a bit about what your mission is there. What are you hoping to achieve with it?
Yes, so the Mustard Seed Institute, first of all, we were thinking of a think tank in Kigali, but then we developed the idea further. We realised we didn't want to just be talking about things. We wanted to be doing things. What was really needed for change and development was doing things at the grassroots level. And we realised also that being in Kigali, while it was nice, was cutting us off from where the real work needed to be done, which was in the rural areas, because the rural areas are still terribly, terribly poor and underdeveloped. Parts of Kigali are really developed and look amazing, but that's not really the whole story of Rwanda, of course. That's a tiny minority that enjoy that life in Kigali. So there's majority live in the poor rural areas and are struggling. So we said we have to base ourselves in the rural areas. And Nepo had family land in a village called Gwanghuba in Gatsibo district in Eastern Province. And we said that's where we need to base ourselves, because that's where he was originally from, where his family had been when they were alive, and where he'd grown up. So we had that connection there. So we went back, and I think we went actually on our honeymoon after our wedding, and it was just basically this deserted field, overgrown field, and there was nothing there. And
I'm sensing a trend here in your romance. It was a bit of a trend.
It's a bit bizarre, the romance in our relationship.
Hey, yes, whatever works. Whatever works. Two children later, something must be going right.
Yes, exactly. So, we said this is where we're going to build our institute, and there was nothing there, and I think a lot of people thought we were mad, understandably. But then we said, no, we want to work in this community, because despite it being more than 2 decades after genocide, there's still division, there's still tensions, because everyone in those areas, they know what people did. They know who are the survivors, who are the perpetrators, who did what. They know, everyone knows the history, and the children of those perpetrators and survivors know the history. So we wanted to do something that brought people together and was a form of reconciliation, but in a very practical way. And we saw the need for economic development, not just, the social change had to come with the economic development. So we wanted to bring people together to work towards a common purpose of economic development, and by that create reconciliation and this cohesion in the community. So we started with doing crops. We started with a pineapple crop, a maize crop, a bean crop, and we started with the piggery. So we started trying to do agriculture in an improved way, having an agronomist and training people how to do agriculture in an improved way.
So this is very ground level based economic development that you're doing.
Yes, that's what we wanted. We wanted to get out of previously I'd been interested in the academic side and the policy side, but now I felt, no, we want to make a difference at the grassroots level, because that's where we can really get some change for the people, some tangible change. Wow. So then gradually it developed, and then we got we were very blessed to have some funding from some Australians who shared our vision and were willing to go on the journey with us, and some funds from the Australian embassy in Nairobi that has a small grants program. And we built a community centre, and we built a piggery, and we built a poultry centre, and we've expanded the farm. And then we were able to offer more programs. So we had a piggery, which we hadn't had pigs previously in the area, and they're a great source of income because there's a huge demand for pork. Wow. So we started training people in how to raise pigs and building up a huge piggery, and then growing more crops in an improved, using improved methods for bigger yields of maize and beans and other products. So we had a bigger yield and more productive ways, and also employing people to work on the farm and learn as they were working. So being trained at the same time in more effective farming methods, because there's huge food insecurity and malnutrition. And then we had the community centre where we were doing, women were learning handicrafts, weaving baskets that we then sold in Australia. We also had literacy. We've developed a literacy program for children. And then we have a big library, which is supported by Sydney Cove Rotary, and was helped by DHL. So we have a big library, and they have access to books, which otherwise they have absolutely no access to any written materials. We have a literacy program where they come and learn English, because the country now has English as an official language for education and academia and business life. But no one in the area is understanding or speaking English, even the teachers. So you can understand the huge challenge for these kids. Wow. They can't even pass primary school because they don't understand the language of the curriculum. So it's a huge big problem.
They're teaching in English, despite the fact
that sometimes they're supposed to be teaching a curriculum in English, but they don't understand English. So you can understand the huge challenges, and the kids are not learning. So we saw that as a big mission that we needed to address, because otherwise the kids just don't learn, and they're trapped in this cycle of poverty in this rural community. So that's part of our project, to get that literacy up as small as we can do. We try to contribute to that, and we did have an Australian teacher visit and help train some of the kids and try to train the teachers. So that's ongoing, and so we continue to develop our farm. It's a model farm, so people can come and learn from and be trained, but also work and be employed. And we have the community centre where people can come and develop skills. We also make products. We've got our special body lotion that we make from natural products and honey, and we're trying to develop those basic products that we can then market. And we're also expanding into agri-tourism, so people can come and visit. We're also building next to the farm a house where people can come and stay on Lake Mahazi, because we're actually on Lake Mahazi, which is very beautiful and very underdeveloped. So we want people to be able to come and stay on the lake. So that'll be another source we can train people in hospitality and create jobs that way. So it's about creating jobs, creating opportunities, bringing the community together to try to have socio-economic development at the grassroots level and see some real positive change for the future.
I mean, that just sounds like absolutely wonderful initiative. And, from what I've read online and listening to you, that it seems to me that in Africa and many developed countries, my family's from India originally, this sort of ground level human development training, access to people being able to be self-sufficient is so important. And there's a whole story here around the impact of foreign aid and how that's sometimes prevented people being able to be self-sufficient that I'm sure we could go into. But before we get to that, I do want to bring Nepo in here and have a little bit of a conversation about your story. So obviously it's been 25 years since the Rwandan genocide, which, I think horrified the world. 27 years, forgive me, 27 years. But I would say that most people don't really know what happened at that time. It's been quite a long time. If you feel comfortable, would you mind telling us a little bit about your story and about what happened then? Because I think it's an important time in history that needs to be remembered and needs to be reflected on.
Thank you. I think Sabrina has been speaking more passionate about Rwanda in a very positive way. So I'm going to take back people and talk a bit. I can't tell all, but I can talk a bit about the genocide and why the genocide happened and how are we living the aftermath of the genocide. It's a very important time for Australians to really understand from the perspective of a genocide survivor what did happen before, during, and after the genocide. When we talk about the genocide in Rwanda, we think about 1994, but it was really prepared decades before that. It all started with the colonialism period. The Germany came first in 1818 something, and then after Germany's Belgium came, and then they really started I think this is kind of very deep divisions between Rwandans, mainly Hutu and Tutsi. In 1960s, when other African countries were enjoying access to independence to their countries, that's really when Rwanda started suffering, because 1955, something happened that at that time called revolution, and then Tutsis started being killed, and then majority of them were chased away from their homes. Their homes were burned, cattle killed, and many of them killed, and then they took refugee into neighboring countries, but mainly in Uganda. And many years after 1959, let me say 60s, 70s, Tutsis got persecuted, killed, isolated from the life of the country. But at the same time, even inside the country, the life was not really politically not very stable, economically not stable, because the country is very, very poor. And then after many years, after maybe 30 years, in the 1990, the 1st of October 1990, the children of refugees, Tutsi refugees, have already created a movement, Rwanda Patriotic Front, and the army branch, Rwanda Patriotic Army. And they launched the war to Rwanda because they were saying that Rwanda was refusing them to come back. The former president, Habyarimana, was saying the country is full. He can no longer bring back Rwandans who have been refugees for many decades. He was starting to negotiate with some other countries, say, please take my people. My country is full. He joked one time, and then he took empty grass, and then filled it with water. And then he said, the same way the water cannot fit in this grass, the same way I cannot bring more Rwandans in the country. So that was really significant moment when the former president was saying, we cannot allow these Rwandans who have been in neighboring countries, who have been participating in the lives of other countries for so many years, they cannot come back. The division was very deep. The poverty was very deep. And the war started in 1990. So between 1990 and 1994, so many things happened.
So there was already a conflict in place between 1990.
Yeah. It was already a conflict, but not a conflict, a war between the government and the RP, the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, which was mainly composed by the refugees from 60s.
Right.
So it's taking the roots from 60s, not just in 1994. Some people are confused and think, what did happen for Rwandans to wake up in the morning and start killing each other? No.
But what you're saying is that it's a much deeper sentiment that caused
it's much deeper. I want to start from 1960s, but it's really going back to the period of colonialism, even in 18. Maybe after the First World War, but let me just focus on between 1960 and 1990. 1959, the Hutus were getting support from the Catholic Church and the Belgium ruler, because the Rwanda was under the leadership of Belgium. Then they just campaigned and they said, Rwandan Tutsis are not Rwandans. They should go back to Ethiopia, to Egypt. So they started creating these theories that Tutsis are not Rwandans. They killed them, majority of them. They chased them away. That was from 1959. They burnt their house using helicopters, using Belgium and the former Rwandan soldiers. 1961-63, the Catholic radio based in Rome announced something like a genocide was taking place in Rwanda. Tutsis were being killed and in the form of a genocide, but no one really took care about it. 1973, then there is a coup in Rwanda. The former Army Chief of Staff outrouted the former president, saying, you're killing people, so we should really get rid of you. Then people thought maybe this one is a new president was going to bring stability, peace, and he enjoyed 21 years on power. And then there is also something going on. It's not only in Rwanda. There's so many things going on around Rwanda, like in Uganda. So many changes happen in Rwanda. And then majority of the younger Rwandans who were born from Rwandan refugees, they joined the movement in Uganda. They fought for those movements in Uganda. They fought for in Tanzania. They fought in Mozambique. So they were just desperate to come back home and say, yes, we should fight for these other countries, but one time we should go back home, because the country was telling them, you are not Rwandans, you are foreigners. You should, if you want to come back, it's impossible. They started kind of forming kind of organizations, but it's at the end of 80s, around 1987. That's really when Syria, the Uganda was Museveni, the current president of Uganda, was taking power with a big help with the Rwandan refugees. And then in 1987, they formed what we call now Rwanda Patriotic Front. It's now called it's known as the RPF, the ruling party now. Then they started pressing the former government of Rwanda and telling them, we have been away for so long. Majority of them were in their 40s, 30s, and they were born in Uganda or Burundi, former Zaire, DRC now, and the other countries. They are saying, yes, we have been away for so long. It's time now we should come back and be in Rwanda and share everything we can share in Rwanda. And then in 1990, there is a movement of democracy. The French president was pressing the former colonies, telling them you can no longer have one ruling party. You should really create the multi-parties in system and really install democracy. And then the same time when the war started, it's also the same time the country was under pressure to start multi-partyism. So there is, and immediately, many parties have been created in Rwanda, political parties. At the same time, the war started because the former government was refusing to negotiate with the RPF now, with their Abiy wing, the RPA. You can understand when the war is happening, so many other things happen as well. So the poverty increases. And also there is a big movement, internal displacement of people, because if there is a war between the government and the rebels, mainly from Uganda, but it was a movement formed by many Rwandans from all over the world. People were coming from USA, from Europe, from Burundi, from Zaire to join the RPA and say, we have been away for so long, we are desperate. It was kind of like a Zionist, where people were coming from everywhere to join the movement and say, we need to go back to our land and share. And in my family was still living in Rwanda, because there are some Tutsis who were still living in Rwanda. My family was living in Rwanda. So immediately when the majority of the Tutsi started what we call now the Liberation War of 1990s, so then the Tutsis in Rwanda started being harassed, persecuted, taken free to be jailed, and then started also being killed. So those are Tutsis living in Rwanda. So there's a big group of Tutsis joining the RPF, claiming their rights, fighting to come back home. Also, there are Tutsis living in Rwanda who never left Rwanda, who stayed living in Rwanda. Then the government said, these are your brothers, sisters, and families. So you should also you should share the consequences. Instead of going to the front and fight with the people who are fighting, then they started attacking us and mainly Tutsi families. And that was between 1990, 1991, 92, 93, and the genocide was
Nepo, can I ask, were you how old were you during this phase? Were you in Rwanda at this time?
Yeah. Yeah, when the genocide happened, I was 11 years old.
Wow.
But we started experiencing these things from 1990. I was a young boy going to school. So mainly I was born in a rural area, almost 150 kilometers away from Kigali. My family was living in a rural area, the same place where Mustard City now is operating from. It's a poor family like many other families. We woke up in the morning happily, we go to fetch water from the lake. But in our way, the life was okay because we were sharing it with many other people. Then when the war started, we go to school. Then they started counting how many Tutsis are in the class. You can imagine a class of maybe 30 people or 40, where a teacher has to come every morning and say, I want to see how many Tutsis are attending the class. And immediately, Tutsis were a minority, like 6, 5, or sometimes 10. And then, so you start feeling that harassment.
Wow.
And then immediately, I can just give some experiences that we had. In 1991, end of 1990, the government started to create militia groups all over the country. The country was divided in almost more than 400 districts. It is a very small tiny country, but also divided in very tiny districts. And then after district, we have sectors, which are smaller, and maybe sometimes the sector, which district had maybe between 10 and 14 sectors. And each sector had 150 younger Hutu militias who were trained as a paramilitary. And their role was to be used to harass and to kill Tutsis. And they were called Interahamwe, those who are working together. So then, this thing we call ideology, they started training them. You can't tell someone to kill a neighbor just so easily. You really need to teach them. You need to give them a very good reason. So because then they start saying, Tutsis are not Rwandans. They should really go leave the country and go back. Tutsi are taking advantage of your economy. Economy was not even there. they own lands. The lands are not there. You can understand a very tiny country like Rwanda where people are talking about land. They start just creating. They started calling Tutsi many names, like cockroaches. You can imagine going to school, they call you a snake. Of course, if you meet a snake, if you are not an environmentalist, you are able to eliminate the snake.
And
they call us cockroaches.
These are your classmates of the same age that
yeah. These are my classmates, these are my teachers, these are my neighbors.
Your teachers and your neighbors. It started to become a really sort of difficult period of time by the sounds of things.
But it's not coming, it's not originating from our community. It's just coming from the top down bottom.
And was this a political narrative by the government as well that was leading?
Yeah. It was on the radio. It was in different meetings. They were conducting across the country. They were openly saying, one time we will kill you. Openly. And we knew that one time.
Pressure building of intensity between, the government and the minority Tutsis. That it just sounds.
Yeah. And then they say if they are defeated on the front, confronting the RPF, then in our communities, we were living, there is no place for Hutu, no place for Tutsis. It's just intertwined. We live in the same community, same poor houses. We go to fetch water on the same lake. Then you come home, they tell you are taking advantage over us. It was not really true. It was a shared problem, but then the government decided. We knew that one day something big will happen because they were telling us, they were singing around us. From 150 militia groups, they now started creating other groups from women. We have women militia, we have children militia, even made children, put children to become the militia. So in 90, then there is a negotiation is going on between the RPF and the former government, which nearly ended with a peace deal at the end of 1993. But later on the evening of 6 April 1994, the former president was shot down. And immediately he was flying from Tanzania to sign a peace deal. And then he came back home to Kigali. In his plane and with the Burundian president and some of his other colleagues.
So the death of the president
and the plane was hit by him.
That started the whole event.
Then the president was but everything was really in place. So the thing was like this. There is a president who was refusing to sign, but ended up signing. Then his hardliner group decided to say, no, we don't want to share power with Tutsis. Then they started, one of his colleagues, who was a very senior military, his name is Kano Bagosora, he's in Arusha now, in the custody of ISTR. He said one time that I'm going to prepare apocalypse, the end of Tutsis. He said it openly on the radio. So we knew he was the boss. Then he started buying machetes. They distributed machetes. So machetes, immediately after the plane was shot in Kigali, they started killing us, saying we have killed. They accused us of killing the former president. That's not impossible. I've never seen this president. Not even on TV because we didn't have TVs. Not even in newspapers because we didn't have many newspapers. But we have been singing his name for so long, but never saw him. But when being accused to kill him, that was very ridiculous. The following morning, I was staying with my family in my village. So the family was me, the firstborn, and the 4 other children. My 3 brothers, and 1 sister. My mother and my father. A family of 7. But we had a big extended family. In the morning of 7th, many Tutsi houses around us started being put on fire. People being killed. being children, being pregnant mothers, being old people, all killed. So around 10 in the morning, our family has been attacked by this militia in Erahamwe, and the majority of the Hutus singing, accusing, calling us cockroaches, snakes, that it's your time now, you have to be killed and eliminated. So we gathered in one church, which is about 12 kilometers from my home, and by getting there by foot, you walk from home and hiding in the swamps and the hills until you reach that church. And we think the church was the safest place to be living in by that time, because you couldn't go to the administration, because that's where the plans were being held. The only place we thought was safe by that time was the church. And because the majority of Rwandans were Christians, maybe more than 90% were Christians. So we could think maybe they can kill us from our houses, from the swamps, from the hills, but not in the church, the house we call the house of God. Because everyone on Sunday, we stopped everything and then we go to church. But this time, even on Sunday, even on Saturday for some Seventh-day Adventists, they couldn't stop killing Tutsis. The church, our church, I'm talking now from the local experience, our church was full of we counted more than 5,000 people in the big compound of the Kiziguro Catholic Parish, which we call church. We stayed there for 3 days with my family, some of my family members, with the neighbors, with many Tutsi that were gathering from around that place because everyone was trying to hide. And then the military, militia, the politician, mainly the head of the district, and many other people, the famous Gatete, Burgomestre, they came to the church with supported by the military, supported by the gendarmerie or the police, and then they start killing one by one. So what happened? It's just coming to the church. They're trying to find, to check, to make sure that there is no military, no other PF infiltrators. They thought maybe other PF might be inside and they caused them troubles later, but none of those military were there. It was just the desperate Tutsis is hiding in this church, and they start just separating. Men sit here, women sit here, children sit here, and then they start taking one after another, killing. Even the mother with infants, they just cut the mother's stomach, like to get the kids outside, saying even the head of the RPF left Rwanda. They said they made a mistake when they let him leave Rwanda when he was 4 years. I'm talking about the current president of Rwanda, Mr. Paul Kagame, because when he left Rwanda with his family, he was 4 years. Then they said they made a mistake. So they wanted even to kill the kids in the wombs of their mothers. There is now 300 meters away, there is a hospital. They are killing people from the hospital, but also they're killing people everywhere. And I don't know how to describe it, because it was a hell on earth, but a hell caused by your neighbors, the people you know, the people you speak the same language. When I'm talking like this, people might think, the people cannot even communicate. You know, when you communicate with your killers,
there were people. They were people
they just kill you.
But you knew from your community.
You can communicate the same language. You can look into their faces. You know them because they are your neighbors.
Yeah.
But they have no mercy. It was about finishing off all Tutsis. We were very lucky. Because if the RPF was not there, I think now Rwanda would have completely been decimated from the map of the world. But even if killings were being carried by the mass Hutus, men and women, I think as a believer, I think sometimes God have some of the people who could say, even if everyone is being part of this, myself have been helped by Hutus. One time, the guy, I was sitting in a church, and then the one enemy came and trying to beat me in my head. And then I had some little money that I got from my mother. I paid to him. Then he took me outside. From outside the complex, they were just driving us to the nearest pit to be thrown in alive. Then I escaped running. So one of the Hutus decided to help me and took me into his. He was one of the internally displaced people. So he was also part of the killers, but he decided to separate himself from killing the people. And he took me. He took me with many other people, but some others were killed on the way to his house. And it wasn't even a house. It was I don't know if you know these refugee camps where people are living in tents.
I've only seen them.
Yes, smaller tents. It's just a tent, actually. It's a tent. And then he took me under what I can call his bed. He said he hid me under his bed and said, "You have to be very, very careful, because if my wife can hear your voice, you are immediately finished." So men were even fearing the terrible thing what happened is.
And how old were you?
And which is very tricky for Rwanda.
Were you 11 when this?
I was 11 years.
You were 11 years old. I can't imagine what that must have been
I was 11 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my whole family. My mother was pregnant. They had also to take the baby out of her because they were saying he or she. I'm talking about the baby might be the future Kagame or future Rwigema. Those are two were at the head of the RPA by that time.
So you were separated from your family at this point. You were when you were hiding under
my family. When we left home on 7th, my family was so we were all together. So when they attacked us, we gathered in one place. We decided to stay in one place as a whole community of Tutsi that were being targeted. And we tried to defend ourselves with stones, with sticks, for about maybe 4 hours. Then 4 hours later, the military came and then they started shooting at us with guns, and of course, grenades. So we couldn't resist. So some of the people got killed immediately. We lost the first day of the genocide. We lost 70 people from one place. They were put under fire and burned with fear. But some others were killed by being shot with guns and or traditional weapons. Many were using traditional weapons. And then I decided to run away and hide in a tree. And then my mother trying to run after me because she was saying, "Come so we can die together." Every mother wants to die with their children. They didn't want their children to be separated. Everyone was saying, "Just come so we die together as a family." But something came into my heart and said, "Run away." I did. And my younger brother decided to come after me. Then I had there's a tree around. I climbed a tree. I stayed there for all the time when Tutsis were fighting. And then the funny thing is, 2 of the inner army came under the tree and they stayed there for about 1 hour. But lucky enough, they didn't look up. They could have easily saw me and with my brothers and some other friends that were hiding in the tree. But around us, so many children were crying, many women were crying because you can understand if one is putting you under fire.
Well, yes.
You die slowly. And then many children, our colleagues, our former classmates, were participating in the killings of our fellow Tutsis and neighbors and the people we have shared everything, The funny story that I want to share here is to show you how deep it was. Some Tutsi were getting married to Hutus. You can understand this. Tutsi wife getting married to a Hutu husband, or Hutu husband getting married to a Tutsi wife. In most of cases, I know some stories, in most of cases, the let me use the example of a Hutu that got married to a Hutu woman that got married to a Tutsi. The brothers of the woman Hutu married to a Tutsi, they contributed to kill the children of their sister and also kill the husband of their sister. So, and most of the time they asked their sister to join them in killing only children because they're saying we can't have snakes in our families. That's how deep it was. My whole family got killed. Yeah, I had my younger brother. He was killed. He was 1 year younger than me. My other younger brother also got killed. He was 2 years and a half younger than me. My little younger brother, we were at the church together. He got killed from the church. My little sister was also killed in a church, thrown alive in a pit. My father and my mother also got killed from the church, and many, many other family and relatives. So it was just horrific to survive this. But lucky enough, I survived. I spent almost 103 days running away before I can manage to meet the RPF soldiers. But in between, one Hutu family helped me, and I spent most of the time with them. And they are here now. We are friends. And then, it's a lot of things to talk about. But what I can say, the genocide was systematically planned. The government had a hand. The former government had a hand in it. Trained the Interahamwe militia groups, equipped them with killing skills, but also with propaganda and ideology that the Tutsis are not Rwandans, that Tutsi are cockroaches and that Tutsi are snakes, minimizing to the level that you think you're not killing a person, like you are killing a snake or you're killing a cockroach. That's how. At the same time, I'm talking about my community. At the same time, these things were happening all over the country. All over the country, you can understand. Being in Kigali, the capital city, being in the very far west, being in the east, most of the places, Tutsi were being hurt, killed. In the same way, it was happening in my village. It was also happening in so many other villages and towns of Rwanda. And in 100 days, we lost more than 1 million people. We loved, we cherished. But at the same time, the genocide was happening. The war between RPF and the former government was also still going on. Because the RPF, they changed their mission a bit. They said, yes, we should stop the genocide, but also at the same time, we should chase away these people that are killing innocent lives. Very complicated.
Indeed. Nepo, first, can I say I can't even fathom the story that you've just told and the experience you've had. And I'm terribly sorry to hear what happened to you and your family. But I'm just so I'm so grateful that you would choose to share this story on this podcast and share it with me. Because it's story.
We need to share. I think for Australian community, I have a smaller message for the Australian community. We know today there are many Rwandans living in Australia that are trying to change the narrative of the history. And I don't think the Australians should allow this to happen. They should really connect with the real survivors and then listening to the narrative of the history. We know there are so many things that happened in between and after the genocide, but really we feel sad when you hear people that their families committed the genocide, calling themselves genocide survivors and living in Australia and trying to change the narrative of the history. We feel sad when we hear this, and some of the Australians supporting them ignorantly, but we really believe that there is a true story. The genocide was prepared by a government, supported by many countries, including France. The first trainings of the Inner Army were supported by French military. We know this, and everyone knows this.
In fact, the French president was just in Rwanda, correct?
He was coming after 27 years to say, and he didn't even say sorry. Yeah, he didn't present his apology. He made one step towards the apology, maybe, but he should maybe be more courageous and say sorry because they participated openly into supporting the former government that committed the genocide. But what I'm focusing on now is life.
Well, yeah,
immediately after the genocide.
And I think that says so much about you and Sabrina as a couple, that you have invested what must be immense hurt and pain that one can only imagine into the work you're doing now in rural Rwanda, into the Mustard Seed Institute, to try and not just reflect on what happened during the genocide and not just honor the immense pain that so many families have faced, but to start rebuilding and start the rebuilding process. And I think that's just so important and so special in terms of what you're doing. And I'm really honored to be able to tell people about it through the podcast. So again, I'm honored you tell the story. Nepo, can I ask, now that you are doing what you're doing and Rwanda is some 27 years on from the genocide, I can only imagine that Rwanda after the genocide was a place that was really ravaged with destruction. And if you listen now to your president, President Kagame, he describes Rwanda one where it is a highlight of sub-Saharan Africa. He talks about economic growth. He talks about the highest enrollment of primary and secondary school students. I understand your parliament has a large representation of women in it. He talks about a Rwanda that is going to be one of the success stories of sub-Saharan Africa, born from this immense pain and trauma that went through in the genocide. And I wanted to ask you, is that an accurate portrayal of Rwanda today? Is part of that story right, or is it not right?
Maybe let me just go back a little bit after the genocide and tell the people what really happened. In July 1994, when the RPF controlled most of the part of the country and they stopped the genocide, more than 2 million of Hutu that committed the genocide left the country. And when they left the country, they took everything they can take with them. Money, cars, anything they could take, they took. They took the arms, and the majority of them went to Zaire, to the former Zaire, the DRC now, DR Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. That's one. And some are going to Tanzania. And then some Rwandans that have been living away from home started returning home. There are some genocide survivors in the country. And then there are former military and the RPF, the new Rwandan military now winning over the country. And when they killed the people, the funny thing is when they started killing Tutsis, they also destroyed their homes and sometimes their properties. The country, between 1994 and 1995, the country was full of dead bodies. All over the country, it was smell. Some of the people, when they were asked about Rwanda, they asked, what do you think can be Rwanda? That was in 1994-95. I remember one of the former president of Congo Brazzaville, when they asked, he was a senior president around that time. And then when they asked him what they think they can do about Rwanda, he said, we should divide Rwanda into two. Rwanda is already very small, and then it should be divided, and then Tutsi go on one side, Hutu go on another side. But also, it was, then Kagame and his people said, no, we should never let the country be divided. Let me now kick off from there. The unity among Rwandans was the key priority. Bringing Rwandans together was the key priority after the genocide, even though it was very hard and complicated to achieve. because you have thousands or millions of killers that have to face justice. And you have genocide survivors that are suffering and are claiming justice for their deaths. You have refugees across the borders, and you have former military that crossed and that want to come back and attack. So you should decide. So it was just a determination. Say, should I keep going on or should I stop and let the international community take over? But the country as such and the President Kagame decided, no, we should keep trying. So number one, between 94 and 2000, there is still war going on. There is the First War of Congo, 1996, which mainly was caused by the presence of the former Interahamwe and the former government that were based in Congo, just a few meters away from Rwanda, trying to attack and to kill the Tutsis again. Between 96 and in 2000, Kagame was not the president yet. The former Pastor Bizimungu was the president by that time. Kagame was the vice president and he was the Minister of Defense. There is a war, what we call the insurgency war, which really also took many lives. Insurgency war, it's the war that was started by the former military, the former Interahamwe, supported by some other countries, neighboring countries, mainly the former Zaire and now the DRC, Congo. So we were still living in uncertainty. The country was there, but not really there. So then 2000, that's when Kagame took over the country. He became the second president after the genocide. The first thing was to think about, how do I bring the country together? Number one, there are thousands of people in the prisons that need justice. They did a research and they said, if it was going to take the normal process of justice, it was going to take almost 150 years and it cost billions of money to take these genocidaires to the courts of justice. Now the country started what we call gachacha. It's kind of restorative grassroots justice, modernize a bit, and then thousands of people faced the justice. So many people got out of prisons. And we learned a lot about what happened because it was happening.
They did justice in groups. Is that how they did it?
Yeah, it was justice in the groups on the grassroots level. People were trained and then people were telling the truth. So that's how even we came up to know the truth of what really happened, because people were going out there and everyone was allowed to attend.
Wow.
And then everyone was allowed to tell the truth they knew. But it was moderated by the selected groups of elders in the community. And that was really, I think, the first success for Rwanda. Second thing, then they decided to create what we call a vision for the country. What is the vision? What is going to take, what are the pillars that are going to direct us to move the country forward economically, politically, security-wise? And then we set up something called the 2020 vision. Number one priority was unity of Rwandans, bringing together Rwandans to be together. Number two was inclusiveness, because most of the time women were segregated in the community. They were feeling like inferior to the rest of the community. That's how Kagame and his government started now promoting the rights of women, so that women can take a role into decisions that are transforming the country's life. But still, even if those kind of things are going on, there's also insecurity around the country going on. So then the country had to, most of the time, to intervene so that the safety of the country can be safe. That's why you hear most of the wars between Rwanda and the Congo and the other neighboring countries, or mainly those. So many things were really created. It's a lot of initiatives. And then I remember in 1995, the budget of Rwanda was 300 billion, millions or billions. It's something really very insignificant. A budget of one person maybe in a remote area of Australia. But I think that budget now have been multiplied by many 100 times or 1,000 times. So economically, a lot of things have been really achieved. Stability and security, I can say, we are very high ranking. Just something that needs to be worked on still. But security-wise, the country is stable. I can now move from Kigali midnight and go to the far end of the country without fearing anything. So of course I'll be crossing with the police. So the first thing his government have to create was the trust was police and the army. The number one trusted institution in the country, police and the army. Number two, justice, taking the people to courts, and also have an international criminal court in Arusha, which also contributed. Also some other courts in Rwanda. Number three, setting the base, education. Because education, in 1994, the country had one university. But I think now we have more than 30 universities. Schools, building schools that goes down to the grassroots. Now, schools have been multiplied by many times. Setting up the economy, tourism. Rwanda is one of the most attractive part of the East Africa or maybe sub-Saharan Africa, where people really want to have together and have their big conferences and meetings, because the country have been really investing a lot into it. Minerals, we don't have many, but I think the country now is being smart. They are trying to set up industries that will gather African minerals, add value, and then sell on higher prices. If you don't have many, use your little one you have. Also gather as African minerals and they add value. Agriculture have been really transformed. Most of the swamps have been transformed, and then people are growing maize. So there's a time where we were really living on international aid even after the genocide. But now the country can self-sustain, feed themselves. Technology is being implemented in most of their lives. I can stay home and pay on my phone with using the mobile money. Telecommunication, which was not really operating in a couple of years back, is operating, and many other companies are trying to come home. We have joined the Western, the big community, international community. Rwanda now is a member of Commonwealth. And then with COVID, has postponed twice the CHOGM, which was supposed to take place in the country. And if I talk about CHOGM, you can understand the magnitude of the kind of events Rwanda can host. And I think Rwanda positioned itself in Africa. Last 3 years, the president of Rwanda was the head of African Union, and he was also chairing the committee in charge of strategizing the way Africa should think and to compete, to be able to compete with the rest of the world.
And in less than 30 years,
it's in less than 30 years.
Destruction. It's amazing that
the country has transformed. If you come to the streets of Kigali, you might, you can see we still really need a lot of investment too. And the country is doing so with so less investment, with some friends and partners and investments. And now we are attracting a lot of investment from foreign countries. Yes, in less than 30 years, I think it's a story.
It's a
story of transformation in Rwanda is a story of success.
Do you think, Nepo and Sabrina, do you think that Rwanda is now an example for other sub-Saharan African countries to follow? Because given this transformation, because so many countries have suffered trauma in Africa, do you think that other countries are looking at Rwanda now and thinking maybe we can do that?
I think, some people, like many Australians, when they talk about Africa, they think Africa as one country, but it's not really. Africa is made up of more than 54 countries. And each country, mainly the sub-Saharan African, they have their own stories. Rwanda came from far, from down the bottom. We were lucky to have a president who is very tough, serious, focused, pro-people, and a president who is focused on your interests, and also the president who managed to build institutions that I think can function and deliver the results. The problem mainly for Africa and African countries, I will just give you some examples. Let me just take an example of a country like Central Africa. Central Africa is a very big country, maybe more than 100 bigger than Rwanda. A very rich country in terms of minerals and raw material resources. But it's a country that have been into wars since 1975. They are still fighting even now. They have interest to sit together and find solutions that can work for them. Because in some countries, one solution can work, but some other times one solution cannot work for some other countries. But it depends on the approach. The leadership is a key in most of African, the governance and the leadership. Who is leading and where does this government X in X country really thinking about their own people, or they are thinking about their own interests? If you put your self-interests first, I think Africa will even go backwards. The number thing that Africa needs to work on is leadership and governance. That's the number one priority. And build a leadership that are people-centered and raise the level of democracy in most of the countries, even if sometimes democracy in Africa is not really working the way it's working in the Western countries. But the countries can sit together, discuss on problems, find on solutions, seek advice and help from outside sometimes. This is really what helped Rwanda. When we started the Gacaca courts, everyone was thinking about 150 years waiting. You can imagine if one has to wait. No one is going. Here's a life expectancy in Rwanda is about 69. And then you tell me to wait for 150 years. It was really not going to work. That's when the people sit together and they look into our history and see what were the elders in the past doing when it came to judge people in their community, when we didn't have this modern system of justice. So we came up with Gacaca. We came up with Umuganda, where every last Saturday of the month, we all came out of the houses and we go to work voluntarily to clean the streets, to plant the trees, to build the schools.
Wow.
And it's automatic. We're not doing it now because of COVID. But normally it's automatic. Every last Saturday of the month, every Rwandan and the people living on the soil of Rwanda, we have to come out, go out and sometimes build schools, sometimes clean the streets, sometimes also work on some specific issue. And also it's a way of bringing the people together. So every month at least, Rwandans in their communities come out, greet each other, work together, and including the president himself. He had to come out also as a number one citizen and to work out. So I believe that if Africa really want to transform, they need to look into their history and say, this is our problems, and make a list.
I hear you speak so passionately about your country and about Africa. Allow me to be a little bit cheeky and ask you, have you ever thought about running for office yourself? Have you ever thought about being a Rwandan politician?
Yes, I say, I'm very happy to work at the local community level.
Yeah.
Because from what Sabrina said, the work we are doing for mustard seed, let me just explain a bit so you understand
Please do.
Where my leadership role can apply. Two of us, Sabrina and I, you can imagine Sabrina from Tasmania, and from Sydney. And you can again imagine her living in more than 100 kilometers away from the capital city of Kigali. We didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. I'm talking about this community. Sometimes even no toilets, or sometimes drops toilets. So, and the place where I lost my family. This is the place I lost my family. I lost everything I loved during the genocide. We decided to put our family into risk and go back to that same place and then start something from scratch. The vision here was, if we cannot be the presidents and be the ministers or MPs, but at least you can start something that will touch people's lives. I was supposed, every time I went back to that community, I met with the people that killed my family. I faced them. I greeted their children, and sometimes I greeted them. But what we wanted to achieve is also to fit in this vision of Rwanda, of bringing the people together. That's number one. That's the reason why we decided to go. Number two, you look at the people's problems. We analyzed, why did the majority of Rwandans, of young people, joined and contributed to the killings during the genocide? They didn't have jobs. It was very, very easy to mobilize them because they had nothing to lose. And they even tricked them and said, committing genocide is a job. You kill Tutsis and then you gain their belongings. So everyone was very excited about it. I don't need to worry. I need to kill Nepo so that I can own his house. And the funny thing, they start even destroying their houses. And then they can own our cows. And the funny thing, they start even eating our cows. They didn't even keep their cows. So there is a total confusion. So when we decided to move back, we said, these people have lost hope. You can understand killing someone, being accused of killing someone. There is no hope. There is a trauma. And then you can understand losing someone. There's a trauma. And then you have physical and the spirit and the internal mental wounds and the disturbance. And the thing that Australians have to understand here again is the former killers and their families and the genocide survivors, they are still living one next to another. They don't have a choice. And they are living in almost the same conditions, extreme poverty. So what the master was trying to do, and I was trying to do with my wife, Sabrina, is to say, is it possible, really, to bring these people so at least they can work together? It's like setting a common interest, which is a job, pay, and then see if the people can really come and work together. When we started, people were not really coming so easily. But now, if you call 100 people, you will get maybe 200 people.
Wow.
Because we have created that belief between us. When I came first, I was a young man in my 30s, and they started saying, maybe he's coming to revenge. I didn't have stick, I didn't have guns, I didn't have anything. But every time they couldn't trust that I'm coming just to start something. I'll start a business or start from scratch. We start with them. But maybe 4 years later, when you come back and you interview the people that we really worked together, I think we have employed more than 1,000 people in 4 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
They touch the money. We have trained more than 500 young men. They are now back in their community, in agriculture and animal livestock. And we are still influencing everything. We are thinking about something new. We are influencing the community. This is how things should be worked. You should be united if you want to achieve anything in your life. You should have a skill.
I can hear that coming through, this unity, this, trying to unify your community. I can hear that coming through. Sabrina, may I ask you, because you've been quiet for quite some time here, and I wanted to get your perspective just quickly, Nepo.
Yeah, sure.
So you came back to Nepo's homeland, so to speak,
Yes.
which had gone through tremendous trauma. And Nepo was just talking there about, what would people think when he came back? What was his purpose? How did they react to you being, arriving, in a place like this and starting the Mustard Seed Institute?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, of course, I hear the stories from Nepo and from his other people about what happened there. But it's sort of strange because when I go there, because I've never seen the atrocities and the horrific times, it's hard to sort of imagine it like that. And so I meet the people and I can think, get along with them get along with them well and feel that it's fine and smooth. And then I hear later, that's the person that killed so-and-so and that's the person who killed so-and-so. And it's kind of a shock to me because you think, I've just been with this person and you have no idea. But, of course, you're around these people that have killed on a huge scale and interacting with them, but you don't know their histories. And so I guess I have the advantage that I can interact with the people without knowing their history unless someone tells me later. And then I'm like, oh, goodness, it's kind of a shock, even though you know the reality of the situation when you're actually confronted with it. It's like, oh, my goodness. And so, of course, I am still very much an outsider. I still struggle with the language a lot, but I've always felt very safe and very welcome in the community. I love, especially the children. My passion is working with the children, especially because they're so enthusiastic. They're so welcoming to me and so loving to me because I wasn't sure. I mean, they could look at me and get scared or think, oh, gosh, but they're very welcoming to me especially. And so when we have the programs for the children, I love being part of that. And that way also it's easier for me to communicate with them as well. And we do our language classes and they're so joyful and they're so enthusiastic. I mean, we even during COVID early on, we had them coming to get worksheets and go back home and then bring them back to be corrected. And these little kids, 9, 10 years old, are bringing back their homework. We gave them little packs, the pencils and papers. They're bringing back their homework all perfectly done, arriving on time. They're so organised and so committed, which is absolutely wonderful, and they make such good progress. And early on, even where we're living now and going to Guanghoba, to MSI, people will call out Mzungu, which is the word for white person or foreigner. So for a long time, I was just the Mzungu. So people actually, as I'm walking along or even driving past, they'll yell out, Mzungu. And so that's a bit off-putting sometimes. It's not threatening. They don't mean it in a threatening or rude way. It's just them getting excited because they don't see a white person in that area much. So they're surprised and they're curious. And they'll sort of come up in groups often and they'll stare a lot. And that's just what they do. It's not threatening, but it is a bit awkward. Yes. These people just stare and shout. But as time has gone on, they've got used to me. And now instead of being called Mzungu, I get called Mama Rafaela or Sabrina because here you get called Mama or Papa of your firstborn child.
Oh, I see.
So I'm Mama Rafaela. So then they'll know my name or they'll know me as Sabrina. So instead of being called the Mzungu, I get called my name, which is a great improvement. Makes me feel much better.
I can imagine.
And people are warm and friendly. And I love the security here because unlike a lot of other African countries, I can be part of the community here, even though I obviously look different and can be perceived as having money or having wealth. That's just the perception.
Yeah.
But I don't feel a target or anything, and I can walk around freely by myself, or I can push my little baby around in the pram, which always causes commotion and people to follow me because they're not used to prams. But I don't feel any threat or any, people want to come up and talk to me, question me. They'll be curious and stare, but there's no threatening, threatening nature about it. And I don't feel like anyone's, trying to mug me or anything, which is a reality in many of the other African countries. If you're a foreigner and they think, oh, you might have something we want. But here you can be very much part of the community. People know you, and people will look out for you. So that's why I really like it. So even though I'm obviously different, I can integrate, and I can feel part of it and be active in the community. I don't need to sometimes say if I'm living in South Africa, people live in walled compounds, or even Nairobi, they live in walled compounds and all this. But here you can live freely in the community, even though you're different. And even my little daughter, Rafaela, she goes to the local school. Obviously, she looks different from the other kids, but she's welcome, she fits in, she loves it. So that's the beautiful thing here, that it really is somewhere where you can integrate and be part of the community and be active. And that's what I love.
Are they learning the local language as well, Sabrina?
Yes, I am learning the local language, and that's my biggest challenge. Yes, I really struggle with it. I'm not good at languages, and learning it at a late stage in life, it's a real struggle. And that's probably my biggest frustration, because often I have to have a translator if I want to do something sort of official or really make progress, or people just don't understand me and I don't understand them.
Yeah.
But I get along, I'm trying, and it's a journey.
You can go to the market?
Yeah, I can go to the market. I can survive, basically. I can survive. I go to the market and buy things, and I get around and I can ask basic things, but I couldn't have an in-depth political conversation with anyone. But I can ask how much is this and understand and ask basic things.
I'm sure it'll come soon. We'll have to end soon, and we could keep talking about all of the wonderful things that you're doing there. And I am absolutely captivated by both of you and what you've been saying. If I ask perhaps you first, Sabrina, you've started Mustard Seed, you're in a country that is still recovering, but as Nepo has told us so eloquently, is perhaps the standout in sub-Saharan Africa of what could be. If I was to ask you just to describe in one sentence what you hope for the future of Rwanda, for you and your family and for the Mustard Seed Institute, what would that be? And then maybe I'll go to Nepo after that.
Oh, that's a good question. I would like to see continuing unity, real reconciliation, deep reconciliation that really goes to the hearts of people and to the next generation, so that this hatred and divisionism isn't passed on to the next generation. So there's true and deep reconciliation within the community and for the next generation, and that there be peace, security and prosperity for all the communities here, including in the rural areas. So we really see an improvement in living standards. So that prosperity, that obviously we need the peace and security to be able to work towards prosperity. But now that we've got the security, that it be long-term, that in terms of people's attitudes towards reconciliation, then we can have long-term security, and then we can have the prosperity to build up on the prosperity. That would be the greatest thing, I think, to get the living standards to a higher level. And there's been so much progress made, but we still see this terrible poverty, like in Guanghoba, where the MSI is. People live in mud brick houses. The houses are mud brick. They've got dirt floors, two rooms with dirt floors and mud brick walls. I mean, that's how they live. There's no furniture. There's nothing in the houses, basically, hardly. And it's horrific to see people living like that. Like we wouldn't. When you look at the houses, in Australia, you wouldn't put your dogs in the houses. But here, huge families with little kids are living in those houses. And I always get angry when I see the kids having to collect water in the yellow jerry cans and take it home, thinking people are still having to collect dirty water from a lake for their houses. It's still having to collect water. So those things are still very upsetting. So if we can achieve those things of reconciliation, security, peace, and then prosperity. And that will give the long-term security for the country, I think, because we've really got to uplift those rural areas because that's where I think the threat would come from to security in the future. So we've really got to uplift those rural areas and give people, as Nepo was saying, hope and opportunity so they see a future and they don't turn and aren't susceptible to any propaganda or genocidal ideology, because they have hope and they have a decent living standards. And we're still working towards that, but we see that there is security, and that's a major, major thing. And that's the first key step to anything, but we need to see that move towards prosperity.
Yeah, indeed. And Nepo?
Yeah. Thank you. I think the future for Rwanda, the country need to keep working hard towards reconciliation, unity, because those are the key ingredients to the future. Any kind of future, being political, being economical, unity is the key. Number two, we need really to invest, to bring more investments, mainly in the more rural areas. I would even call some more friends from Australia and the other countries who are listening to us today. If you want to support Rwanda, you support the mustard seed. And the mustard seed can create more jobs. And the more jobs and the trainings created, it's a hope for maybe 10 more years. Because when we see it in the kids here, when you're training them and they start touching money monthly basis, they are little money, but when they start touching money, you can see the hope, you can see openness, you can see the smiles. We want to see more smiles on the faces of African children or Rwandan children. We need really to invest more, even more than aids, investment, bring more investment, create more, bring more skills. The government should emphasize in investing more in improving education. Because like Mandela said, education is present and future. Invest more investment in education. Security is key, and the cooperation between countries, because you cannot keep losing money in different wars. Just you invest money in a security, strengthening security, but you then invest money or lose money in fighting unnecessary wars. If Africa can stop unnecessary wars, I think Africa can improve maybe 2 times or 3 times or even more. Another thing is democracy. There's a lot of people should think about how to share power in a peaceful way. If when democracy is strengthened and people can discuss internally, share their views without killing each other, I think the future will be bright. Education is number one. Security is always going to be the epicenter of everything. Socio-economic transformation and the more investment, mainly in the rural areas. Also, government investing in the things, basic things like access to water, access to electricity, improving people livelihood, like improving houses. Also, when the people work together, nothing is impossible. When the people work together, nothing is impossible. For African countries, I think Africa is a continent of opportunities, full of raw materials that everyone is dreaming of. Being China, being France, being America, they're all dreaming of having what Africa is having under their soil. But how can we turn these opportunities into profitable way to transform the people of our the lives of our people? It's about also bringing leadership, accountable leadership. Just people thinking about the leaders that are people driven, the leaders that are with visions of and deep understanding of their population and willing to work for their people. Also, the people that are supporting their leaders to have a common understanding to their problems and the way their problems should be handled, and attract more investment from foreign countries instead of just relying on the international aids, while we have mainly. Let me just think about a country like Congo. They have all the kind of minerals in big quantities, but we still don't have roads that are far less expensive compared to the minerals we have. But we invest in the wars, unnecessary wars, and that taking people's lives. We should stop wars in Africa. We should promote democracy. We should promote accountability. We should promote attract investment, promote tourism, because we have natural things for people to see. And we should really invest again in education. That's where the future of Africa is. When we don't have wars, there's a peace. Africa will not immigrate to foreign countries. For Africa immigrating to other countries, they should bring what they are learning in those countries back home, not just going to talk about bad things to their countries, but bring your knowledge, bring your skills, bring your investment, and then together we can build a better future. Thank you.
Nepo, what I admire so much about listening to you is, despite your trauma in your early life, the amount of positivity you have for your country, for your family, and for the future of Africa. It is as somebody who's merely an observer from a long way away, it's just wonderful to hear. And I just love the idea both of you have of bringing smiles to African people and African children and Rwandan children as being a wonderful thing to aspire to. So firstly, can I just say how honored I am that you would take the time to come on this podcast, and to you, Nepo, to share your story and the way you did. I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you both and to hear your story. And hopefully one day I will be able to come to Rwanda and visit you.
Yes, very welcome.
You can come to Rwanda and see what you are talking about.
And then the next time we do this podcast, we'll do it in person at the Master Seed Institute.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you can do it at the Master Seed Institute. You can visit genocide memorials.
I would be honored.
You can visit the villages of reconciliation where former perpetrators and genocide survivors live together.
Well,
and we want
be a
to
date.
be the spirit of positivity across Africa.
That'd be great. Nepo and Sabrina Sibomana, thank you so much for being part of the Smarter Cities podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much for having us. And greetings to our friends in Australia and around the world. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Smarter Cities. Please do subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or LinkedIn. Leave us a rating, it always helps. And tell your friends about us on social media. Intro and outro music is by Bruno E. at Public Memory. We are produced by Social Titanium out of New York. Check him out at socialtitanium.co.